Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, March 4th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief, Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor, Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
And Senior Editor, Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
So it's Monday, but it's not a water cooler today. We have to push that till tomorrow because of scheduling conflicts. And Jacob, you are not where you normally are. You're not recording where you normally record with the same mic. Is that correct?
Correct. I normally have a nice mic, which makes you sound like a professional. I am currently house sitting for my mother while she is out of her home, watching 7 dogs. So in order to get decent sound and to get away from the dog noises, I'm in her bedroom closet with all the doors shut. So hello from the closet.
So 2 out of the 3 of us are recording from a closet. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll deal with the not as the sound is not as great as it usually is, but I think we can hear you fine. So I think people will still enjoy this. Okay. Let's dive into the news. Let's start off with Metal Gear Solid. This is the movie that Jordan Vogt-Roberts has been trying to make for a couple of years now, and over the weekend, kind of like this whole campaign spawned up to cast Oscar Isaacs in this movie. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so the Metal Gear Solid movie has been in development since, I think, around 2014. It technically doesn't have a green light yet, but now Oscar Isaac, who of course is in Star Wars and Inside Llewyn Davis and a bunch of other things, says that he wants to star in the movie. During an interview with IGN, he said, Metal Gear Solid, that's the one. I'm throwing my hat in for that one. And Jordan Vogt-Roberts, the director, who's been attached to that movie for a long time, responded to that on Twitter, saying, to everyone asking how I feel about Oscar Isaac saying he wants to be Solid Snake, the full process required to cast an icon hasn't even started. But ask Boss Logic where the idea for his brilliant mock-up came from. The ball is in Oscar's court. He's referring to an image that he shared on Twitter. Boss Logic is a guy who puts up, he creates like digital art of basically any sort of fan casting that happens to be going around the internet. And one of the images he created last year was of Oscar Isaac in the role of Solid Snake for a potential Metal Gear movie, and it seems like the director of this potential movie specifically asked him to create this mock-up. So it certainly seems like this could be, this is not an official casting announcement, but if both parties are interested and maybe the stars align, we could end up seeing Oscar Isaac as Solid Snake in a Metal Gear movie.
Now, Jacob, I know you are a fan of this video game series. What do you think of the possibility of Oscar Isaac being the lead character in this?
I think they definitely need a big name. I mean, Solid Snake's voice was actually recast with Kiefer Sutherland in the most recent game, actually much to my chagrin, but that's another story. So I know that Hideo Kojima, who created the game series, definitely likes American movie stars. He likes the idea of a marquee name being Solid Snake, so I think this is the kind of thing that would definitely make him happy. I'm not so sure I see it quite yet, because there's a gentleness to Oscar Isaac that even seeps into his action roles that is lacking from Solid Snake. Solid Snake is very much inspired by Kurt Russell and tough guys from the 80s, and I don't see Solid Snake having that Oscar Isaac vibe. I think he's a little too charming, a little bit too sweet, but I love Oscar Isaac. I'm willing to be shown that I'm wrong. If he wants to break free of the Poe Dameron charming space Fonzie look, playing a really tough-talking philosophical soldier with tons of blood on his hands, may be the way to go.
I mean, I've never played Metal Gear Solid, but just having watched friends play it and stuff, he doesn't seem like as gruff as what they need for that role.
Yeah, David Hayter, the screenwriter who's also a voice actor who voiced Solid Snake in the first 4 games, has a very, very distinctive voice that Kiefer Sutherland couldn't quite match. I think a lot of people have David Hayter's voice in their brain wired to the character. So whoever they cast has to live up to that voice. And I don't hear it in Oscar Isaac quite yet. But, he's an actor. We'll see what happens if this happens.
A quick counterpoint to this, Jacob, is Oscar Isaac's performance in Annihilation. He plays sort of a stoic, tough soldier in that movie, and there's very little of his normal charm on display in that role. So maybe that's like a little closer to what this could be.
That's a good point. I need to see him have a 20-minute monologue about nuclear weapons and philosophy, and then we'll talk. He needs to say all to a ghost. He needs to be able to talk about nuclear weapons and philosophy to a ghost for 20 minutes. Then it's Metal Gear.
Little does Jacob know that is the screen test that Oscar Isaac actually has to go through to get this role, as a 20-minute monologue about nuclear fallout or whatever you just said. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our next story, and this is actually kind of surprising because Edge of Tomorrow is one of those movies that I think we all loved and was kind of critically acclaimed, but didn't, do that well at the box office, maybe because, I don't know, the marketing for the movie was not that great. But it seems like a sequel is actually in development, and Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt could both return. What do we know, Jacob?
Well, the interesting thing about the story is that we've been hearing rumbles about Edge of Tomorrow 2 for a few years now. I feel like almost immediately after people started realizing the first movie was good, even though it didn't do well. And now Hollywood Reporter says that Warner Brothers is officially saying, yeah, let's go for it. And they've hired screenwriter Matthew Robinson to write the screenplay. Matthew Robinson wrote The Invention of Lying and Monster Trucks, which isn't the most impressive resume, but we all know how screenwriters have their work changed in the process. So I'm not going to be down on Mr. Robinson quite yet. But they do report that if Cruise, Blunt, and director Doug Liman like the script, they're going to move forward with this, which I think is really interesting because, as you said, Peter, the first one, it did okay. I don't think it, and I think when you take international money into account, I think it may have broken even. But it was a movie that people did not find and love until home video, until the title was essentially changed to Live, Die, Repeat, which is a much better title. And people started saying, hey, that Tom Cruise movie is actually pretty good. And the people after the fact became big fans of this. So
but by the way, if they make a sequel, is it going to be called Edge of Tomorrow 2, or is it going to be called Live, Die, Repeat 2?
It has to be Edge of Tomorrow 2, right? I mean, I personally am not a big fan of the rebranding. I feel like Edge of Tomorrow is a bad title, but I feel like you're stuck with it. I feel like once that's on the poster and in the theaters, you're stuck with it. However, if they want to call the sequel Live, Die, Repeat, so it's Edge of Tomorrow, then Live, Die, Repeat, which could be even more confusing, I'll be okay with that.
And also, what would the story be? Because, spoiler alert for Edge of Tomorrow, but in the end of the day, the hero wins, and I guess is starting the day over again?
That's a good question. I know that in the past, Christopher McQuarrie, the director of the past Mission Impossibles, Tom Cruise's frequent collaborator, he did the final version of the script for Edge of Tomorrow. He spoke about how a couple years ago, about how the sequel would allow the ending of the first movie to make sense. He wouldn't elaborate, but make of that what you will. I don't know what that means either. But I know that also Doug Liman has said in the past that the sequel would go in some really crazy directions and up the ante for all the time jumping and time repeating. I don't know what that means. I mean, I'm imagining, for example, we just saw Happy Death Day to You, which essentially pulled it Back to the Future Part 2 and had characters dying and repeating through the first movie, overlapping events of the first film. So it was a very, very ambitious way to take a small horror franchise. So I'm curious to see if maybe we see something similar with this. But Ben, what do you think? Is there room for a sequel here? 'Cause I think the first one's perfect. I have no need for a sequel.
I know, that's the thing, is I love that first movie so much that I'm automatically a little hesitant about a sequel, just because I feel like capturing that lightning in a bottle is going to be really tough. To me, it's just a countdown at this point until McQuarrie comes back on to write the script, because it seems like Tom Cruise doesn't make a movie without him these days, and it seemed like McQuarrie had so much ownership over that first movie. I know Doug Liman directed it, but it just seems like, from all of the interviews that I've heard and read and podcasts that I've listened to about that movie, it seemed like McQuarrie was like so in the trenches on that film. I can't imagine that he would just be willing to step away and maybe take like an executive producer credit or something like that on the sequel. And I know he's busy with those 2 Mission Impossible movies, and those are supposed to be filming back to back. So who knows when Tom Cruise would even have time to do this? I don't know.
Well, Tom Cruise would have time to do it, because when he's not filming or, training for insane stunts, he has time to film another movie. Like an actor, you look at any actor's, resume, they can film, upwards to, 5 films, 6 films a year, depending on the size of the role. I just don't think McQuarrie is going to be available for this, especially with those back-to-back Mission Impossible movies.
Yeah, and would Cruise be interested in making a blockbuster without his guy there by his side these days? I don't know. So I feel like there's a lot of questions here, and it seems like this is very early days still. So I'm very curious to see if this is something that just gets talked about as oh yeah, this is in development. They have somebody write a draft of the script, and then maybe it never comes together. But I don't know. I guess I'll have to wait and see on this one.
Speaking of the future, I remember probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, at CinemaCon, at the Warner Brothers presentation, Warner Brothers was talking about how the studio was going to move forward, and now that Harry Potter that saga had completed itself. And they were talking about the future of Warner Brothers was all the cinematic universe that was going to revolve around the DC universe. And then, that kind of fell apart. And then I think Warner Brothers was touting that, Harry Potter's back. We're going back to, Fantastic Beasts. That's the future of this studio. And now they are course correcting again. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so I guess the new approach at Warner Brothers is now fewer connected cinematic universes. Kevin Tsujihara, who is the head of Warner Brothers right now, gave an interview to the Los Angeles Times, and he sort of echoed some statements that he and other Warner Brothers execs have made about their approach to specifically to DC superhero movies. He says the upcoming slate with Shazam, Joker, Wonder Woman 1984, and Birds of Prey feels like we're on the right track. We have the right people in the right jobs working on it. The DC cinematic universe isn't as connected as we thought it was going to be 5 years ago. You're seeing much more focus on individual experiences around individual characters. That's not to say at some point we won't come back to that notion of a more connected universe, but it feels like that's the right strategy for us right now. So that, again, like I said, that's sort of we've known this for a little while, but to hear the head of Warner Brothers basically say in no uncertain terms, we are officially course correcting. We are trying to put the control back in the hands of directors instead of forcing everything into these connect the dots sort of boxes is an important thing. In addition to that, they also are looking at a few of their sort of legacy properties to get those back out into the world as well. Specifically, they mentioned The Matrix and more Mad Max movies. So there's been talk of another Matrix movie for several years now, but the fact that was the first thing out of his mouth makes me think that he's been thinking about The Matrix a lot. So I wonder if that movie is actually close to getting an official green light. Like I said, we've been talking about that for a little while, but nothing official has happened yet. And then also Mad Max, that's another one that ever since Mad Max Fury Road came out, that was 4 years ago when that movie came out, and fans have been rabidly wondering when the next movie would come. And then there was this big lawsuit between George Miller, the director, and the studio. So I don't know if the fallout from that lawsuit has actually come to light yet. We don't know.
Could we even see a Mad Max movie without George Miller?
I don't know. I mean, Tsujihara specifically said, we'd love to work with George Miller on furthering the Mad Max franchise. So he, I think there was some talk with the Matrix movie that maybe the Wachowskis would not be involved with that. And I find it hard to believe that Tsujihara would specifically name check George Miller there if he was interested in just the property alone. It sounds like he really wants Miller's vision on, connecting or continuing that franchise. So I don't know. I guess the fact that he's even mentioning that maybe indicates that the results of that lawsuit, maybe they settled and maybe everything is fine and it's all, water under the bridge and they might be able to move forward with this thing. But yeah, that's the future of Warner Brothers right now.
I know I've harped on this in the past, but I think this whole Hollywood taking from the situation that cinematic universes are not the way to go is not the right lesson to be learned here. I feel like they didn't approach a cinematic universe in a thoughtful way, just like, Universal didn't approach the dark universe in a thoughtful way. Jacob, am I wrong?
Yeah, I feel like the position that Warner Bros. Is taking now, which is make good movies first, is a position that Marvel did. I mean, they made Iron Man first. It was a good movie. People liked it. They made Captain America first. It was a good movie. People liked it. And then, even though they had a secret back pocket plan for the Avengers all along, they tested the waters, and they didn't lead with the fact that this is all connected. I mean, so Warner Bros. Is kind of realizing, if we make good movies, maybe people will be interested in exploring more. Honestly, I am less concerned about the DC universe and more about a George Miller-less Mad Max. That sounds terrible. That sounds awful. Don't make that happen. Please bring back George Miller. But anyway, universes are fine and great and good if you can make sure each individual piece works fine. Like, just as a random example, I've been catching up on my comics recently, and the most recent run of Fantastic Four is very good because it stands very much alone. It makes a reference to things that are happening in the larger Marvel universe, but each issue reads as its own standard adventure that I can enjoy without knowledge of what's going on outside of it. And that was never a problem with most Marvel movies, but it was a problem with the DC movies. So I feel like if you are going to, go that direction, you just got to look at making sure each piece is satisfying. And I feel like looking at the success of Aquaman and Wonder Woman, those are very satisfying pieces. Build upon those, see what people like, and then build connections based on those.
I just don't understand why these studios can't learn from, what Marvel has done with Kevin Feige. I feel like you need someone to take on that showrunner role, and you really need to have a plan, and it not to be cynical in that, like, everything about Dark Universe just felt icky. The way it was planned and the setup of the way it connects and stuff like that. It didn't feel like something a storyteller was trying to create. It just felt like something a studio was trying to create to make money, which I know is it's the bottom line here. But I don't know. I love what Marvel is doing with their cinematic universe, and I wish there was some other studio that was able to emulate that in some proper way. I know Disney's even having a little trouble doing that, I think, on the Star Wars side. I just don't what is it, Ben, that, like, why is Marvel getting it right and no one else can get it?
I think it's because they started it, and then, Hollywood, Peter, is a place full of egos, right? So you wouldn't necessarily want to have a studio executive at a rival company just being, like, brazenly saying, okay, we're going to do this exact thing. I mean, Hollywood has always been a place where, the newest, freshest idea is jumped on and copied immediately, but there tends to be a little twist on it, right? It's not necessarily always just an exact copy. So I can fully imagine somebody there being like, okay, we're going to do it this way to stand out from the Marvel way. We want to establish ourselves as a different way of doing things, and they're just realizing that method has not worked for them so far. But it sounds like, as Jacob mentioned, Aquaman performed exceptionally well at the box office, and Sujihara knows that movie and Wonder Woman and what we've seen so far with Shazam, these movies look like they're pretty well standalone type of films, and maybe they're just slowly, they started out in a disaster of a nuclear cloud, and then as the smoke is clearing, they're slowly just coming to the Marvel method of their own accord, and then they'll eventually get back to bringing things together again.
Tomorrow on the Watercooler, I'll talk more about this, but I watched Iron Man 2 for the first time since it was in theaters over the weekend. Kitra had never seen it. And watching that, like, and even, looking at what DC has, or Warner Brothers has done with DC, it's almost the equivalent of if Marvel had decided that, Jon Favreau did such a great job with Iron Man, we're going to put him in charge of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And judging by, what happened in Iron Man 2, I think that would have been a disaster. I feel like they need to have some kind of separation. I know this sounds bad, but I think filmmakers need to be hired to come on and execute a bigger vision of the cinematic universe to work. But I don't know. Okay, we're going too long on this. Let's move on to Guillermo del Toro, who is writing and directing a secret Bad Robot project. Jacob, what do we know?
The movie is called Zanbato, and Del Toro has been developing it for the past 6 years in secret. But now the word is out thanks to Collider, who reported that it is about a young female ninja between the ages of 10 and 15. And Del Toro confirmed this movie exists on Twitter, writing, "This has been in development for the last 6 years or so. Thanks to J.J. Abrams for his maximum security system, it had not leaked. We are still developing steadily. Stay tuned here for news on which project shoots next." Pinocchio, by the way, referring to a stop-motion Netflix movie, is already in active prep in Portland. By the way, not a ninja project. So what we have here is confirmation that there is a action movie called Zanbato being made by Oscar winner Guillermo del Toro that is enough like a ninja movie that can be mistaken for one, but not a ninja movie, which makes you think it's martial arts or swords or some kind of action rooted in that style, even if not necessarily a ninja. So that could be, samurai or a Kill Bill-esque assassin. Take from that what you will. The Bad Robot Machine is still very much at work keeping all of this secret. I'm just happy that even though Del Toro said he was taking a year off after he won his Oscar for Shape of Water, it's been a little over a year, but he's apparently been still actively developing a couple things. He has Pinocchio shooting soon. He has this coming around the corner, hopefully. But he does say, specify on Twitter, that hasn't announced what shoots next. So even though Zanbato is in development, being written and directed by him, he's not specify that it may be the next thing he actually directs. But Del Toro keeping busy and having the momentum of it being an Oscar winner to get things made, it's still pretty exciting. I'm all for whatever he does next. And I love that he's following up his big Oscar fish romance movie with a movie that could be mistaken at all for a ninja movie. Yeah, I love the balances between genres like that.
I'm a little cynical here, Jacob, because if you look at Guillermo's IMDb resume and what he has in his upcoming projects, he always is working on a lot of things. He's juggling a lot of things, and 95% of those things never get made. Never mind with him, but do you know what I mean? Like it's and the fact that he says this has been in development for the last 6 years just makes me think that this isn't happening. Am I wrong?
Oh no, you're not wrong at all. I mean, the laundry list of unmade Del Toro movies is massive, as long as my arm. Like his Lost Mountains of Madness movie, his Haunted Mansion script they wrote for Disney. Like, these are all projects that I would have loved to have seen, and I think he would have loved to have made them. But whatever goes wrong behind the scenes, I don't know. I feel like people want to work with him and he wants to make these things, but things just don't connect. One of these days, I hope he writes a tell-all book to explain it all. But I'm going to go ahead and have hope here that because he has that new momentum, because Shape of Water did make money and because it did give him that prestige, they can now put Academy Award-winning director Guillermo del Toro in the trailer. It's something that, will hopefully help push these things through now. Yeah. But then again, in his tweet, he does specify, stay tuned for news on what shoots next. So it doesn't necessarily mean this shoots next, which means he could be distracted by anything else.
Yeah. Part of me believes that maybe, Bad Robot's looking for a new home, and maybe this is one of the many projects that's on their slate of stuff in development that they're kind of like showing off to potential suitors. And maybe that's how this eventually leaked after being in the mystery box for 6 years. But, I'd be excited to see Guillermo del Toro do I guess it's not a ninja movie, but a movie with ninjas. Yeah, I'm in.
Ninja adjacent at very least.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our last story. This is something that broke last week and kind of caused a stir online. Yesterday at a gathering, everybody I was with was talking about this, and that is Steven Spielberg is still unhappy with Netflix and is proposing new rules for the Academy. Ben, what do we know?
Well, Steven Spielberg is a member of the Academy's Board of Governors, and in April, which is next month, they have a meeting where they do like sort of a post-Oscars State of the Union, State of the Academy kind of situation. And according to IndieWire, Steven Spielberg is going to propose some new rules that basically are going to try to say that streaming movies like films from Netflix can't qualify for nominations at the Oscars unless they play in theaters for a certain length of time. So as you mentioned, Peter, this turned into a firestorm of conversation on film Twitter over the weekend, everybody's talking about this. According to an Amblin spokesperson, Stevens feels strongly about the difference between the streaming and theatrical situation. He'll be happy if the others will join his campaign when that time comes. He will see what happens. So we don't know exactly what he's going to propose.
Well, in the past, hasn't he said that he thinks that Netflix movies should be considered TV movies and thus only be nominated for Emmys?
Yes, he has certainly said that. He said, I don't believe that films that are just given token qualifications in a couple of theaters for less than a week should qualify for the Academy Award nominations. And this has sparked a whole conversation. Like, people,
wait a second, wouldn't that disqualify every short film nominated? All the so many of the documentaries, so many of the foreign films only get that Oscar qualifying week or two of release.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure, and that could be part of the larger points that he's planning on bringing up at this Board of Governors meeting. He could address that difference between feature length stuff and shorts or documentaries. So, like I said, we don't have the full picture of what he's talking about, but based on his previous comments, we have his general attitude toward streaming movies and not just Netflix, but all sorts of streaming films. And I'm wondering what you guys think about this, because it seems like everybody is chiming in with their opinion. Jacob, what do you think? Is Steven Spielberg just completely out of touch here?
I think he is. I think that Steven Spielberg probably has not been to a public movie theater in a couple of decades. I'm blessed to be in a city where I can go see a movie in theaters, where people don't talk, where there's good presentation, great sound, great projection. But I realize that's not the case for everybody. And there are people out there who, don't have access to theaters at all, and Netflix is the place for them to see movies. It is a resource that's becoming increasingly important for artists and art consumers alike. And Ben, since you have the piece open, can you read that quote from director Ava DuVernay about what Netflix did for her?
Yeah. So she said, one of the things that I value about Netflix is that it distributes Black work far and wide. 190 countries will get When They See Us, which is her new project about the Central Park Five for Netflix. She said, I've had just one film distributed wide internationally, not Selma, not A Wrinkle in Time. It was 13th by Netflix. That matters. So there are several filmmakers who have popped up online over the weekend, echoing these comments, saying that it's, Netflix is not just trying to subvert the rules of conventional Hollywood. They are also providing a platform for people that maybe to spread their voice in a way that they wouldn't be in the traditional Hollywood studio system.
What bothers me here with Spielberg is not just him with the hoity-toity I love theaters thing, because I also love movie theaters. I sympathize. What bothers me here is the idea of, you can't come to our club. Netflix, you're not welcome in our club that has all these other people who have been members for years. Sorry, you don't follow our rules. You can't join. Raspberry in your face. It's elitism. It's elitism, and I think Spielberg is the best director of generation. I will never have a bad thing to say about his movies, and I'm allowed to have two opinions because I'm a human being and I'm not the internet. He's a brilliant filmmaker who's incredibly wrong and looking backwards in a big way at a system that, Netflix can be really frustrating. They do things that anger me all the time. But I do think they put more good into the world when it comes to the things that they're willing to make, the things they're willing to back, things that Spielberg himself, as a producer, would never have backed. And it's very frustrating that he wants to keep these filmmakers and this company out of his club.
Yeah, and there's filmmakers like Joseph Kahn that are sticking up for Spielberg and saying that, Netflix is this big bad company that, if they win, it's bad for all of us. But I don't think that's a reason to change the rules. And honestly, as a consumer, Netflix has always wanted to provide their content day and date with their subscribers. You give the consumers a choice to see it in theaters or see it on their platform. The exhibitors really haven't wanted that, so they've kind of agreed to these small week or two windows of theatrical presentation, and we don't even really know the numbers there because a lot of that is kind of secretive as well. But I don't know, all this registers to me as fear. It's fear from people not wanting things to change. I am a huge fan of the cinematic experience. I love going to the movies, especially when it's a big event film. or even like a small date movie. But I feel like if I'm a movie theater, if I'm an exhibitor, and I fear that the whole thing is going to come crumbling down if we get rid of this exclusive time window, then the theatrical experience and what I'm providing to the public isn't worth anything in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no value in it if the only value that they're providing to consumers is an exclusive window to see this thing on a big screen. Like, there needs to be more value than that. And I know I'm getting a little off track here. Franklin Leonard, who started The Blacklist, pointed out that Netflix's first forays into the Oscar campaigns were with Beasts of No Nation, 13th, Mudbound, and Roma. He says that it's possible that Steven Spielberg doesn't know how difficult it is to get movies made in the legacy system as a woman or a person of color. In his extraordinary career, he hasn't exactly produced or executive produced many films directed by them. Now, I think a lot of this conversation turned into this and kind of became about race. Is that fair?
I think it's a huge piece of it. I mean, I think that the people pulling the strings in Hollywood, the Academy, and the people who are making those decisions are predominantly white and male, and they've tried to change it over the years. There's been the push to diversify, but a massive component of Hollywood is that it's still dominated by white men. And Netflix is a company that says, we'll take anything. We just need content. So we're going to give all these other artists who are exciting and not white men a chance to make movies. And I don't think it's necessarily that the Academy's racist. I don't think Steven Spielberg's racist. I don't think maybe studio heads are racist. But it's a paradigm shift that they may be too old-fashioned to roll with. And that is what needs to be acknowledged and dealt with.
I want to know how many movies each year Steven Spielberg, outside of world premieres and, private press screenings, how many movies Steven Spielberg actually goes to a cinema and sees with the general public?
0.
You think it's 0? Because he has one of those systems, I'm assuming. If anybody in this world has one of those systems, they have a system that you can pay lots of money to get, major releases that are in theaters now into your home theater system. I'm sure he has that. And I'm sure he's watching movies either on that or on a screener or whatever. Maybe he actually has the actual DCPs. I mean, he's Steven Spielberg. I don't understand why.
I know what you're saying. It's like if he experienced if his version of the theatrical experience, if he knew what it was like to see a movie on opening night at AMC when people have their phones out and are talking and whatever, maybe he wouldn't be quite as up in arms about the whole thing, or at least maybe that wouldn't necessarily be a central thesis of his argument, is preserving the theatrical experience. I saw somebody say the other day, this entire argument seems to have turned into the preserving the theatrical experience on one side versus Netflix, this scrappy upstart on the other side, and it seems like people are just taking sides and stepping into corners to support these two things. And somebody said, I forget who it was on Twitter, the theatrical experience, this idea of it being this holy thing. If you look at the beginning of theaters, when they were first invented, there was nothing holy about that experience. It was just a way for people to make money, as much money as possible, by cramming 200 people into a dark room and charging them money to sit there and watch
laid
something
on a wall.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Netflix, on the other hand, yes, they are doing incredible things and giving people a voice, but is that going to continue forever? I don't think people should put Netflix on a pedestal necessarily as the ultimate, they're still a Silicon Valley tech company at the end of the day. And yes,
a lot of their movies haven't even been that great.
Well, yeah, that too. But they're making smart moves and moves that are that align with people's politics and seem progressive or are progressive, and they should be lauded for that. But I don't know if we can necessarily just assume that is going to be their end game forever. Who knows? Once 5 years from now, this entire system could look so different. So I just think before people jump into a corner, it's worth looking at the history and the context of both of those corners and what they represent and what they might be in a few years before screaming at other people on the internet about it.
Yeah, it's weird. Like this whole thing to me, and I know I'm probably oversimplifying this, but it feels like a few years ago when Uber popped up and all the taxi companies were basically preventing Uber from going to major airports, and they're lobbying and stuff like that. It feels like this is the old system, not understanding the way things are going, not understanding what consumers want, and it's like that popular film category. I mean, I feel like this is just indicative of the Academy as a whole, and I hope there's enough young blood there to see that this is ill-conceived, I think is probably the best word.
Yeah, and really quickly, just to sort of follow up on that, Peter, one last thing I'll say is that I learned something in this article that Chris wrote on the site. In the 1980s, as the home video market was starting to really take off, Spielberg apparently was dead set against the idea of releasing his movies on VHS, but eventually he ended up relenting and released E.T., for example, on home video in 1988. So maybe this is just one of those types of situations, like an Uber taxi sort of situation where the change is coming. He, tries to stand firm against it for a little while and then realizes the error of his ways. So hopefully, that's what's going to happen here.
By the way, I want to say, if it wasn't for Steven Spielberg, I don't think any one of us would be here recording this podcast. So it's like, I don't want to dismiss him as a person, but
sure,
I feel like he does. We've always seen him as a visionary, and I don't see how he could be so wrong on this. And like, Jacob, am I missing anything to this picture? Like, could we be wrong? Is there any devil's advocate here? Like, what are we missing? What could we possibly be missing?
I think we're missing being rich, successful filmmakers in Los Angeles, Peter. I think that if we were if we were in our 70s and we had 40-year careers making those popular movies of all time, and releasing them in theaters, we would see this differently. But we're not. We're ordinary movie-loving people with very different perspectives, and I think it's impossible for him to see how ordinary folks feel about this in the same way it's impossible for us to really understand how he must feel as somebody who sees this entire industry from a perspective that we can't even begin to understand because we're not Steven Spielberg.
Yeah. If anybody out there is listening, is screaming at their, iPhone or whatever your device you're listening to this podcast on, please write us at peter@slashfilm.com. I would love to hear the other side of this argument. I know on this topic, everybody at Slash Film is kind of on the same page, so there's really not an argument here. And I would really like to hear another take that could, I'd love to hear someone that has something that could convince me to consider the other side more. But I just feel like I can't. There's not one angle to this that I feel like. I mean, I would, 20 years from now, I would be so sad if movie theaters don't exist. But if that is the choice that is made because of this and because consumers don't feel like the movie theater is worth going to, then it was all a sham in the first place, in my mind. I don't know. I believe that people are still going to want to go to movie theaters. I feel like awarding the Netflix Movies Academy Awards is not going to hurt anything in the long term, but am I wrong there? Like, will that prevent more? I mean, will it make a bigger decline in the movie-going audiences? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think that years ago, Spielberg predicted another moment of him speaking about the future that theaters would become more of a niche thing. Ticket prices would go up. Theaters would be more about showing the big mainstream releases, and smaller stuff would go elsewhere. And that has kind of come true. I mean, a lot of the smaller, like mid-tier movies that used to be all in theaters are all being, made for streaming services now. A lot of Netflix's movies are the kind of films that would have been made by a Rob Reiner type in 1994, and they're not being made for studios anymore. Studios want to make the $150 million movies that return $1 billion, and they have no interest in mid-tier stuff. So I think Spielberg kind of called it. I think that theaters will stick around, but become more of a boutique thing where you go see the new Marvel movie there, you go see the new big blockbuster there, but places like Netflix are going to be there for the movies that aren't being made and aren't being released in theaters.
I don't know. I just don't see that being a bad thing. Like
Exactly.
I don't feel like 90% of the movie going public were going to the movies to see the small movies anyways, which I know is sad, but it's true. You know,
and Netflix puts them on a platform where people can find them, because these are the kind of movies people would find in VHS 20 years ago, and now they can find them on Netflix. And I think that's fine.
Okay, we've reached the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can read all the stories we mentioned on today's show in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, or tell us why we're wrong about Spielberg and Netflix at peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page, write us a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow. I'm worried that, like, we're missing a piece of this puzzle and we're going to look dumb in years to come. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I mean, I have that same sense, Peter, but I feel like I feel like all three of us are very intelligent people who spend a lot of time thinking about the movie business, and if it's not immediately obvious to us, I don't think we're going to feel that stupid when, if the other shoe ever drops.
And there's also discussions that Netflix and Amazon are going to buy movie theaters and stuff, right? Like, we've talked about that on the...
Yeah, there has been some talk about that, yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like that's a step in... Like, I don't understand... I don't know.
I feel like Netflix was like poking around at, I can't remember whatever chain that Mark Cuban owns was the one that...
Yeah, Landmark.
Landmark, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see the theatrical experience going away, and I don't see how preventing Netflix from winning Academy Award or being eligible for Academy Awards helps anything other than maybe, I don't know, who does, like, how does that my brain's broken.